Thank you for joining us on iBrand Daybreak today. We're moving to the focus for this morning. The federal government of Nigeria has indefinitely postponed the launch of the much-anticipated Nigerian Student Loan Scheme. Despite initial plans and preparations, including the completion of program implementation planning and website creation, the scheme's commencement has been delayed multiple times, formally set for January 2024. After missing the October deadline, the postponement was announced just 48 hours before the scheduled launch due to ongoing corrections required. This development has left members of the National Association of Nigerian Students disappointed, with some expressing a loss of hope in the federal government's education loan scheme. Also, Senior Staff Association of Nigerian Universities has begun its 7-day warning strike. The directive indicates that there will be a complete blackout in all the universities. Water treatment plants and clinics will be shut down, while those involved in the proposed matriculations in some universities are to stay away from such activities. I recall that President Tinubu had recently directed that university workers that were on prolonged strike in 2022 and their salaries stopped by the Muhammadu Buhari's administration after the invocation of no work, no pay policy should be paid 4 months of withheld salaries. While the Academic Staff Union of Universities members have since been paid, the non-teaching staff comprising SANU, NASU, and National Association of Academic Technologists, NAT, are yet to receive any payment. To have this conversation with us this morning is Taiwo Hassan Soweto. He's an educational rights activist. Good morning, Taiwo. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me. Welcome.
All right. While on several occasions on this platform, you've made your stance on the student loan scheme known, it has been postponed till further notice by the federal government, even after going against every advice or words from every corner saying it must come in active by January of this year. It didn't. While we were looking forward to a further date, we now finally heard it's been postponed indefinitely. First of all, how do you react to that postponement? Well,
first and foremost, the postponement itself is a confirmation of all of our criticism over the past few months. We had said that the Student Loan Act was a very bad policy, that the Act itself was a product of poor legislative draftsmanship, and that it was riddled with contradictions, that would make it completely unworkable. But we even went further to show that it was baseless, it was not justifiable, because it was based on the supposition that Nigeria does not have enough resources to fund public education, which said that that is not true, that the student loan does not need to be imposed on students when there are other options to funding public education. So that what the government had been doing really since October last year was to try to panabit a very, very bad policy. Because by the time the House of Reps ad hoc committee on student loan organized the legislative summit around August last year, where all of the groups that had been opposed to the student loan made very brilliant proposals and submissions, it was clear, to the government that they couldn't go ahead. But then they kept on trying to patch it up. But obviously they realized that it wouldn't fly. But of course, millions of naira had been wasted on all of that process, not just the website development and co. The government also embarked on a very serious PR scheme, paying people to talk, commendably about the loan. So it's all of that money down the drain now. But then there has been a further development, which is that as soon as they postponed it, they have now gone back to the National Assembly, with a bill to repeal the act and then reenact a new one. And that for us is a matter of interest because it just shows that the government is not letting go of this policy. All right.
While we wait, while we will eventually, in the course of this conversation, get back to the repealing and reenactment of that bill, let us look at the 7-day strike that's just been embarked on by the Senior Staff Association of Nigerian Universities, the NASU and the NAT. 2022 was a very, should I call it tug of war type of year for the tertiary education sector in Nigeria. And the then government imposed a no work, no pay policy for members of ASU and, you know, other bodies that were striking at the time. While ASU had received their salaries 4 months, the period, these bodies that I've mentioned haven't received theirs. How do you react to that situation?
It's, I mean, a part and parcel of the strategy of the government always to sow division, you know, within the university system, and obviously to discriminate against, you know, members of those unions, ASU and SANU. It's a long-standing strategy, you know, because you have to ask yourself, you know, it was the same. All the unions went on strike in 2022, and the same, you know, vicious policy of no work, no pay was imposed on all of them. So whatever has made the government to see reason to pay ASU, I mean, they also ought to pay. But like I said, it's just an attempt to sow division. It's also what you have in the health sector, where you have doctors, you know, being put at loggerheads with other staff unions. And that's why, for us in the ERC, what we always call for, so the absolute unity and solidarity among all the staff unions. So that what we expect is that at this stage that the SANU and ASU are on a one-day strike, demanding, you know, for their own payment, you know, you expect a union like ASU, you know, to issue a public statement of solidarity, you know, because obviously the no work, no pay policy is a very, very bad rule, you know, that must not be allowed in industrial relations, because it punishes, is a law that punishes a child that you have beaten, you know, for crying. You beat a child, and then the child cries, and then you punish that child for crying. They say that workers cannot go on strike when you have consistently over the years refused to implement, you know, collective bargaining and agreement with them after they have written mountains of letters to you, and then they eventually embark on the strike and you impose no work, no pay. So I think it's in the best interest of all the unions that, you know, there's this absolute unity against the attempt to divide them. And, you know, federations like the NSC and TUC also need to wade in, you know, in order to ensure that government is compelled to listen to the SANU and ASU.
You have made, you know, a repetitious statement about government sowing a seed of discord. In your words, you said sowing a seed of division among the union. Is it wrong for them to say no work, no pay? In your own view, would you have a company where people refuse to work and you pay them, and then someone comes up and says it's you know, it's tantamount to sowing a seed of discord? How do you mean?
I mean, if if you refuse to meet agreement or fulfill agreement with your staff unions under the collective bargaining arrangement, in the labor laws of Nigeria, workers have a right to withdraw, you know, their labor. You know, strike is covered under the labor law, and under no condition should, you know, an employer punish workers, you know, for going on strike. It's there in the international labor law, so I mean by the ILO. So that no work is actually a completely illegal policy. It's undemocratic. It's not something that can be allowed. But they keep on implementing this, and that is what has given the government, you know, the opportunity to just continue to fail at meeting their obligations, because they know that workers will be afraid of challenging them with a strike, because they know that even further punishment will come for them. We need to all oppose this. It's also the same way they close down campuses or they suspend student activists. When students who have been writing letters about certain bad policies decide to then organize a lecture boycott or a protest, then you then close down the campus. We must say that democracy requires the freedom, absolute freedom of the people, including workers, you know, to be able to let out their anger and frustration in a democratic fashion of protest, peaceful protests and strikes. Because if that avenue is blocked, that avenue of a freedom of expression, then you are only saying that people should express themselves in other ways outside of the laws of the country. And that is not what we want. Legitimate protests, legitimate strikes must be allowed if actually Nigeria is a democracy.
In the midst of all of this, what do you think will be the adverse effect it will have on the economy, especially looking at those who are going to be out of schools? Are you also considering that?
Yes, we are. And that's why it's absolutely necessary that all pressure are put on the government now to ensure that this strike does not last for too long. It's a 7-day on strike, but already we're just in day 3, and it's been absolute chaos everywhere, you know, because the members of those two unions are actually the lifeblood of any organization going to the university. They are not academic staff, but then everything about the functioning of a university is about them, including power supply, water supply, the functioning of the university in any way. And because they've withdrawn their services, it's absolute bedlam. In campuses like Unilag, where this strike has met students writing examination, it's a completely severe problem for those students, because it means that they have to go to examination hall after they have slept in a room without electricity, without fan, the night before. It means that the toilet and bathrooms are in much more terrible shape than they have been, because the cleaners are not at work. It means that even the bins, where they put waste and refuse, are piling up out there because there's nobody to carry it. This is an absolute terrible situation. We all understand that. But the responsibility, however, is on a government that refused to pay workers their legitimate earning since 2022, and then paid some workers after a lot of agitations, but refused to pay the others. The government must do right by SANU and ASU and pay this money. It's a 7-day warning strike. If they don't meet those demands at the end of the 7 days, then we may be looking at even an extended, strike, coming to place. And this must be prevented, but it can only be prevented, by government meeting the demands. That's just what needs to be done.
Okay, so what if it continues indefinitely? Are you also aware of the implication when it comes to the rate of crime when students are not engaged? Yeah. Will it not compound the already insecurity that the country is still battling with?
Yeah,
so,
it will definitely.
So are you trying to correct or make any correction of what is already in place, or you're trying to still create more damage?
No, it's not our
still pushing for this strike.
It's not our responsibility to do the job of the government for it, because it's like blaming the victims, really. You are talking of members of SANU and ASU. These are people who have been existing under the same cost of living crisis as the rest of us, whose salary cannot take them home, whose children are also dropping out of school. So it's the whole nonce of responsibility actually lies on the government, because those who have been put at a disadvantage by not being paid their legitimate earnings have no other way to express themselves than what they are doing now. And of course, doing that also means that it affects others, and actually it can create social disharmony. And that is all of us, including the media, and parents, but also students themselves. Have to say that government must do something. We need to see a situation where in the coming period, for instance, Nigerian students will come out and protest and say, we are opposed to the treatment of our lecturers and our non-academic staff. Government should pay them their money. And that's why I must give kudos to the leadership of the Upper University Student Union, which issued a statement of solidarity yesterday in support of the SANU and NASU. They said OAU they're also on strike in OAU and affecting students, but the student union is leading by example to say that we cannot be facing injustice by ourselves as students and fail to recognize injustice done to members of staff who are our parents, who are the support staff on our campus. You must pay them. What I would say is that they must go beyond that now and be prepared to eat the street if the government refuses to do what is necessary.
All right, let's take a step back to the submission you made in your the point you made in your initial submission when we were initially talking about the student loan scheme, the bill, and you brought to our notice that there's been a new development.
Yeah.
It is in the news, by the way. There's going to be a repealing and a reenactment if it does get to that point. You expressed a lot of displeasure with how this bill had come up initially, and not just you and your organization, but everybody else, every other stakeholder that is affected by this situation has expressed a lot of displeasure. Now we have an opportunity of a do-over. If we were going to have a proper conversation and a roundtable discussion, like should have been done initially, by the way, bringing stakeholders, people who have the clout to have certain conversations about certain issues, especially as far as education is concerned. If we were to have that talk, what would be your submission on that table?
Well, before going to what would be our submission on that table, it would be important to say that, the government is not taking this as a second chance to do right. And that's why even the process for this repeal and reenactment is already demonstrating that the outcome will not be acceptable. And how do I mean?
Why do you say that?
The National Assembly, the Joint Committee of the National Assembly, had a public election 2 days ago in Abuja. All the key stakeholders members who had publicly stated their opposition to the student loan were completely shut out of it. ASU was not invited, the ASU was not invited, other organizations like CAPA, like TIB were not invited. NANS was invited because the leadership of NANS, you know, is completely in support of the student loan and is not complaining about it. And those are the only people who were there. But despite the lack of invitation, the ARC was still there with our memo, 30 copies of it, presenting a blueprint, an alternative blueprint to reposition the public education without burdening students with a loan. When we submitted it, but we were not allowed to make a presentation, so that we are not even sure whether those memos would not just be put in the rubbish bin. But you have to ask yourself, what is public in an area where only the parties of the government of the day, who are clearly in support of the loan, are the ones who are allowed to make a presentation, and the ones who were actually even invited? It took the representative of the ERC several efforts at the gate of National Assembly to be able to even come in, because we were not invited. And that's to show, and that Nigerians must begin to look at this. It shows that the government is not taking this as an opportunity to really have a do-over, to really have those conversations. And we think that it shows a mindset. They don't want to do what needs to be done. And we have made ourselves very clear that a student loan is not necessary. If the real problem is that government is saying that there are not enough resources, we are going to identify where those resources are. And we have done that in a publication that we did in December last year, and also in the memo that we submitted to the public hearing 2 days ago. We identified sources of alternative funding that would mean that the government can raise the sum of 1.7 trillion naira on an annual basis as extra funding to do those things that they say they need a student loan to do in the education sector without burdening students, you know, with this loan. Because this loan still, the new bill that is there necessary for the enactment, still contains some of the contradictions and absurdities of the old act. For instance, it's still very clear that the student loan would only make official, make legitimate a regime of soaring education cost, of increases of fees. And we saw that from July up to now. Our fees have increased on almost all campuses by more than 300%. There's a case at the College of Nursing, Obafemi University, Hospital, Osun State, where fees was increased in December last year for 140,000 naira to 840,000 naira. So therefore, if, as we have already, you know, speculated through our research, that the student loan may not be able to benefit more than 10% of the indigent student population, if you take that scenario, that data back to the College of Nursing, it will mean that 90% of the indigent students on that campus would have to look for 840,000 naira, otherwise you will have to drop out of school. And that is how it's going to be across all campuses. So again, this student loan bill, by virtue of its present formulation, is still going to do what the old ones that is being repealed is going to do, which is going to lead, instead of expansion of access to university education, but rather to the tightening of that access, to shutting the door on people and more people having to drop out. Of course, it's going to lead to long-time, lifelong indebtedness. We had a symposium on the 9th of March this year, and we had a student leader from the United States, come to address us at that symposium. And she explained the absolute devastation that student loan means right now for young people in the United States is the leading factor behind why many Americans don't bother to further their education, don't bother to go to college, because nobody wants to go under the incubus of the student loan. People get the loan, and then they are not able to start a life afterward. They can't get married, they can't have kids, they can't even get a mortgage because they have to pay the student loan. And the average number of years to complete payment of a student loan in the United States is 40 years. So that is a first world country. Bring that scenario to a neo-colonial country like Nigeria, and just imagine the absolute devastation that kind of lifelong indebtedness will mean for young people. And we say no, we reject this future. And it's absolutely terrible that the leadership of NANS has agreed to this kind of thing. And now they are saying that government should add a grant to it. That's what the leadership of NANS is agreeing. And we say that's an absolute contradiction. You first accept that government has a right not to fund education anymore, because the student loan, what it means is that government will no more be putting money into public education. You are the ones to fund it, but you can defer the payment till later. Take the loan now. But when you are then saying that you need a grant, that's an absolute contradiction. What we all need to fight for is first and foremost that government must recognize its role in the funding of public education as a social need. Then secondly, this student loan scheme, if it's going to be in any way salvaged, be turned into a grant to support the living cost of Nigerian students on campuses. And afterwards, you know, I mean, if that is done, those basic steps are taken, obviously we can begin to see, you know, some changes in the education sector.
Okay, that was a marathon, but points well taken. Thank you so much, Taiwo, for dropping by the studio this morning. I think one thing we need to take away from this conversation is the point that the government needs to accept its responsibility to fully fund education, and without mincing words, that is what we're saying. Thank you so much, Taiwo, for dropping by the studio. We appreciate your time. iBrand Daybreak. We're enjoying it on this segment, but we will return with social media buzz after this time out. Stay with us.